I returned from my journey to find my beloved pet gone, thanks to my kids' actions. Standing at the entrance of my quiet residence, suitcase gripped tightly, I gazed at the vacant spot where Max ought to have rushed over, full of energetic tail swings and wet greetings. The place seemed off, empty in a manner unrelated to its actual size. "Brenda, Stephen," I shouted, setting down my luggage and advancing further inside. The quiet reply revealed all I needed to know. My offspring were concealing themselves, a sign they'd committed an act sure to enrage me. By age 55, I'd honed a sharp sense for their wrongdoing, even as they were meant to be grown-ups. I located them in the cooking area, clustered around the counter like plotters. Stephen, my 32-year-old boy, sipped a brew though it was scarcely midday. Brenda, 29 and maintaining the natural allure that had forever simplified life for her, toyed with her device, avoiding my gaze. "Where is Max?" I questioned, despite sensing the truth from the ashamed redness rising on Stephen's collar. They shared a glance, identical to those from their youth when nabbed pilfering treats. "Mother," Brenda commenced, her tone sugary smooth in the style that typically heralded unpleasant tidings. "How did your journey for retirement documents go?" "All sorted with the medical center." "Where is my pet?" I restated, my words even and chilly. Stephen exhaled deeply, gulping from his drink prior to replying. "We required funds urgently." A chance arose that demanded immediate action. The ground appeared to shift underfoot. "You traded Max, my companion, without consulting me." "In a way, he's the household pet," Stephen argued feebly. "The household pet I saved, that I fund, that rests in my space each evening," I countered, fingers clenching by my flanks. "The companion who's been my steadfast friend since your dad preferred his assistant over our 2-decade union." "Listen, it was a solid arrangement." Brenda interjected, her manner protective. "This fellow Paul truly desired a Belgian Malinois, and Max resembles one precisely." "Max is a blended rescue who simply looks like a Malinois." I snapped back pointedly. "I've explained that numerous times." "Well, no one can spot the distinction." Stephen dismissed with a shrug. Even the breeder from the park believed he was full-blooded. I glared at my kids, these unfamiliar figures who'd somehow come from me, whom I'd nurtured single-handedly after their father deserted us, whom I'd backed through higher education and afterward, whom I'd permitted to return to the residence briefly amid their recent money troubles. These individuals who disposed of the creature who cherished me above all, without hesitation. "How much?" I inquired softly. Another shared look. 8,000. Stephen confessed, a hint of satisfaction in his words. The man was eager for a Malinois. $8,000. That's the price they'd assigned to Max. That's the value they'd placed on my emotions. I refrained from yelling. I avoided hurling objects. I merely posed in the most composed tone I could summon. "Who acquired him?" "Mother, it's finished," Brenda stated, extending toward my palm. I withdrew. "Max has departed. Let's proceed ahead." "Who purchased my pet?" I reiterated, pronouncing each syllable clearly. "A mature gentleman called Paul Matthews," Stephen eventually disclosed. "Resides in that fresh neighborhood near the water. Appeared respectable. Wealthy. Max will thrive." I pivoted and proceeded to my sleeping quarters silently, gently shutting the entrance after me, and only then permitted my knees to buckle as I collapsed onto the ground. Max's resting spot remained unoccupied in the nook, his preferred noisy plaything still positioned atop it from where he'd placed it before my departure. 5 days prior. Following precisely 3 minutes of utter despair, I retrieved my device and called the contact Stephen had grudgingly supplied. My fingers shook a bit, yet my speech was firm when a resonant voice responded. "Matthews residence, Mr. Matthews, I am Jane Parker," I initiated, drawing upon the expert demeanor I'd refined over 3 decades as a senior caregiver. "I think you lately bought a dog from my offspring." A dog they had no right to offer. A short silence ensued before he answered, his manner distinctly chilling. "Mrs. Parker, what a curious timing. I was intending to reach out to you this day. It appears your kids have sparked a rather troublesome scenario." "My kids disposed of my pet without approval," I declared, getting straight to the point. "I'd like to organize retrieving him." Your kids did far more than that, Matthews countered, a sharpness creeping into his speech. They engaged in deceit by marketing a hybrid dog as if it were a thoroughbred Belgian Malinois with superior lineage. Regrettably for them, I'm not merely an elderly, isolated individual seeking companionship, as they evidently portrayed me. My gut sank. Mr. Matthews, I am employed by a group that employs assistance animals for particular tasks, he proceeded. We need Belgian Malinois possessing specific hereditary characteristics. Your Max is a fine animal, but he didn't pass any of the hereditary evaluations we ran this morning. I never asserted he was thoroughbred, I clarified hastily. He's a shelter find. He merely bears a striking resemblance to a Malinois. I comprehend that currently, Matthews answered, his manner easing a touch. But your offspring intentionally misled a governmental body. That's national-level deceit, Mrs. Parker. I shut my lids, the complete magnitude of my kids' actions overwhelming me. I deeply regret this. I was unaware. I trust you, he remarked after a pause. But this places everyone in a challenging spot. Your offspring have perpetrated a grave violation. I inhaled deeply. Mr. Matthews, I fully grasp your frustration. Their behavior was indefensible, but maybe we can devise an approach that avoids extreme steps. A silence followed, then a noise resembling a stifled laugh. Mrs. Parker, do you wish to have your pet returned? Above all else, I responded instantly. And your kids, have they absorbed lessons from their past errors? I pondered the inquiry, recalling the series of short-term fixes and just till I stabilized setups that had characterized my bond with Stephen and Brenda over the last 10 years. Truthfully, no, I conceded. They've perpetually relied on me to resolve their issues. I've constantly offered a cushion. Then maybe it's the moment for a teaching that truly endures, Matthews proposed, his manner turning nearly collaborative. I have an offer for you, Mrs. Parker. One that might restore Max to you, impart a crucial teaching to your kids, and possibly spare them from several years in national incarceration. In spite of it all, I was captivated. Go on. Splendid. I'll arrive at your residence tomorrow at 8 in the morning with Max and a few formal associates. I recommend you refrain from alerting your kids to my arrival. What precisely do you intend? I probed, a kernel of worry emerging. Merely some instructive performance, Matthews answered, and I detected the grin in his tone. Nothing causing lasting harm, simply sufficient to cause them to reconsider before perpetrating deceit once more, or trading items not theirs. Defying reason, I discovered myself grinning as well. Mr. Matthews, this is quite unconventional. Please refer to me as Paul, he countered. And yes, it's unconventional, but occasionally unconventional teachings are the most memorable. What do you think, Jane? Allies in a minor act of family fairness. I glanced once more at Max's vacant resting place, contemplating the years of unrepaid debts, violated commitments, and evaded duties. Of how my kids had nonchalantly traded the entity I adored most to address another episode of monetary recklessness. 8 in the morning, I affirmed. Arrive punctually, Paul. The following day, I was serenely sipping coffee in the cooking space when the bell chimed exactly at 8. Stephen, clad in sleepwear, muttered incoherently as he trudged to respond, evidently irritated by the early disturbance. I paused, tallying the moments until my son's startled cry resounded along the corridor. The performance had begun. Mother. Stephen's alarmed tone echoed throughout the dwelling. Mother, you must come immediately. I rose leisurely from the counter, adjusting my trousers prior to strolling casually to the front entrance. The view before me matched what I'd envisioned during my restless evening. Stephen remained rigid at the threshold, complexion pale. In the background, I spotted Paul Matthews, not the feeble elder my kids had depicted, but an imposing figure in a flawless outfit, his gray locks and athletic build conveying an aura of habitual command. Next to him, with tail swinging wildly upon seeing me, stood Max, pulling at his restraint, and accompanying them were two grave-visaged men in somber attire, authoritative emblems shining on their straps. Good day, I uttered composedly, as though encountering national officials at my entrance was routine. Mrs. Parker, Paul addressed me with absolute decorum, though I noticed the spark in his gaze. I think we discussed yesterday regarding an issue involving your offspring. Indeed, I assented. Please enter. Mother, what on earth is happening? Stephen whispered as the party proceeded to our sitting area. Brenda appeared from above, her typical impeccable cosmetics applied despite the hour. She halted abruptly upon viewing our guests, her gaze expanding in distress. Mr. and Ms. Parker, one of the attired men initiated, his speech crisp and formal. I'm Operative Wilson, and this is Operative Cooper. We're investigating a case of deception against a national body. Deception? Brenda yelped, her palm darting to her neck. What do you mean? Paul advanced, keeping hold of Max's restraint despite the animal's keen efforts to approach me. 2 days prior, you traded this animal to me, portraying him as a full-blooded Belgian Malinois, appropriate for specialized duties. You demanded $8,000 for what you asserted was an animal with superb ancestry and ideal operational disposition. It was merely a manner of speaking, Stephen stuttered. People always embellish during sales. When people embellish, Mr. Parker, Paul retorted icily. They usually avoid doing so to a national initiative tied to country protection. Every animal in our initiative receives thorough hereditary examination before preparation commences. Your embellishment caused squandered assets, staff hours, and possibly disrupted our functional timeline. Oh heavens, Brenda whispered, dropping into the closest seat. The funds are the smallest of your worries. Operative Cooper inserted. Deception against the national authority, particularly concerning protection initiatives, is a severe infraction. We're discussing possible accusations with penalties up to 5 years in national confinement. Confinement? Stephen's tone broke like an adolescent's. I observed the hue fade from my kids' visages, struggling to hold my impartial demeanor. Paul and his partners were impressively persuasive, strict and commanding without excess, solemn without slipping into exaggeration. You must grasp the severity of your actions, Paul went on, his speech lowering to a nearly instructional level. Our animals are vital to tasks I cannot elaborate on here. The identification efforts we undertake can determine safety versus disaster. When you deceitfully inserted an inappropriate creature into our initiative, you potentially endangered more than you comprehend. Max, evidently weary of the discussion regarding his hereditary shortcomings, at last escaped his collar and promptly leaped toward me with a delighted whimper. I swiftly placed my coffee cup aside before nearly toppling from 35 pounds of overjoyed animal attempting to cover my face in licks while whining joyfully. He obviously identifies his real guardian, Operative Wilson noted with a dash of sarcasm. Please, Brenda implored, tears streaming openly down her face. It was an awful error. We were clueless. Isn't there a method to settle this? The operative shared looks while Paul observed me, still enduring Max's fervent reunion. A quiet exchange occurred between us before Paul coughed. Mrs. Parker, he directed at me as the legitimate possessor of the creature at issue and evidently an uninvolved participant in this deceptive deal. Your viewpoint could affect our approach. Would you like to share any thoughts on this? I softly nudged Max aside and rose, casually tidying my garments. My kids regarded me with countenances blending terror and frantic optimism. The parent who'd perpetually saved them, who'd always discovered a means to soften their tumbles. I feel my offspring committed a major lapse in discernment. I started, my speech stable and deliberate. They traded an item not theirs under misleading claims for individual benefit. This demonstrates not merely untruthfulness, but a disturbing indifference to outcomes. Stephen and Brenda traded alarmed glances. This wasn't the parental safeguard they'd anticipated. Nevertheless, I proceeded following a deliberate break. I don't think national confinement is automatically the most beneficial reaction. Maybe we can identify a resolution that guarantees they completely comprehend the gravity of their conduct, provide suitable compensation, and create a route toward more accountable conduct moving forward. Paul seemed to weigh my statements, though an astute viewer might have detected a spark of endorsement in his gaze. What do you suggest, Mrs. Parker? Initially, obviously, full reimbursement of the received money, I answered swiftly. Secondly, significant volunteer work, ideally connected to creature care. Thirdly, and crucially, I faced my kids squarely. Prompt self-reliance. No further residing with parent. No additional monetary rescues. No more dodging the results of their decisions. The operatives discussed quietly while Paul scrutinized the Parker pair with focused scrutiny. This might be suitable, he ultimately announced, with certain supplements. Routine oversight by our division for a trial phase, history reviews that could restrict specific job prospects, and obviously a lasting notation of this event in their records, which, although not a legal verdict, might surface in thorough history probes later on. Stephen and Brenda bobbed their heads eagerly, obviously prepared to consent to anything avoiding restraints. All this will be documented in a binding contract you'll endorse today, Operative Cooper appended, extracting formal-appearing papers from his case. Violating any condition of this contract will lead to the revival of the initial legal accusations without chance for later resolution. For almost 60 minutes, the operatives systematically examined each provision of the contract, outlining the assorted regulations Brenda and Stephen had breached, the possible harm they might have inflicted, and the severe judicial repercussions they would encounter if they violated the conditions. Max, unaware of the people drama, had relaxed happily at my toes, sporadically exhaling joyfully while getting distracted caresses. When the papers were at last endorsed and the operatives geared up to depart, Paul spoke to the Parker pair one final time. "You were extremely fortunate today," he declared solemnly. "Your parent displayed greater belief in your capacity for improvement than your behavior justified. I advise you not to squander this chance." As I escorted the group to the entrance, Max padding loyally beside me, Paul lingered momentarily on the step. "Max is genuinely an extraordinary animal," he remarked, a true grin easing his strict features for the initial instance that day. Hybrid or otherwise, he possesses a personality many registered animals would covet. "Grateful for returning him," I answered, softening my tone so my stunned kids couldn't overhear. "And for the instructional spectacle." "It was my delight," Paul responded with a sparkle in his gaze. "Your kids gained an important teaching today, and let's state it was an invigorating shift from my standard pattern. Maybe we could review the results of this instructional activity in a calmer environment. Supper, possibly?" An unforeseen heat rose along my collar. "That sounds pleasant." "Splendid," he beamed, passing me a contact card. "My private contact is on the reverse. And if your kids ever doubt the gravity of today's events, they won't," I guaranteed him with a perceptive grin. "Dread has accomplished its task. The remainder is my responsibility." When the entrance shut, I went back to the sitting area where Stephen and Brenda stayed positioned in dazed quiet. Max positioned himself once more at my toes as though he'd never left. "Mother," Brenda eventually uttered, her tone tiny and unsteady. "We nearly ended up in national confinement." "Yes," I concurred serenely. "You nearly did. Why didn't you inform us you'd contacted him yesterday?" Stephen questioned accusingly. "We could have readied or fabricated additional falsehoods." I concluded, my manner still serene, but with a fresh firmness that caused them both to recoil. "Flee. Persisted in thinking your behaviors lack repercussions." Stephen parted his lips to dispute, but Brenda laid a palm on his limb, quieting him. "You're correct," she acknowledged, abruptly appearing much younger and more exposed without her typical veil of weary elegance. "What we did was dreadful to you. And to Max. And now we possess enduring records with some authority body." Stephen moaned, dragging his palms across his countenance. "My profession is destroyed before it commenced." I examined my kids for an extended instant, perceiving them distinctly for the initial time in ages, not as the youngsters I'd shielded following the separation, but as grown individuals who'd turned experts in sidestepping accountability. "The pact you endorsed," I ultimately stated, "grants you 30 days to leave this residence. I recommend you commence seeking your own accommodations right away." "But, Mother," Stephen started to object. "No," I cut in, my tone astonishingly resolute. "This is final. I cherish you both beyond words, but this phase concludes now. You traded my pet for rapid funds without concern for my emotions or his safety. If I can rely on you so minimally in my own home, then it's time we form a fresh interaction." To my astonishment, there were no additional disputes, merely quiet assents as the truth of their novel circumstance started to absorb. That evening, after my kids had ascended, Brenda to investigate budget-friendly dwellings online, Stephen to revise his employment summary for the first time in weeks, I reclined on the couch with Max snugly curled next to me. The animal appeared resolved not to allow me from his view anytime soon, trailing me between spaces like a worried, fluffy guardian. My device buzzed with a notification. Unfamiliar digits. Supper the following evening to mark our triumphant endeavor. I know a superb eatery that permits polite pets on their exterior deck. I believe we formed a strong duo. Besides, Max obviously longs for you, although it was enjoyable tending to him for a day, Paul. I grinned, an unanticipated warmth expanding in my core as I petted Max's plush lobes. The previous occasion I'd gone on a romantic outing was over 3 years back. A fiasco set up by Brenda with a companion's stylish relative who had devoted the whole night discussing his former spouse. I gazed down at Max, who met my look with that look of absolute doggy devotion. "What do you believe, fellow?" I inquired, rubbing his preferred area behind the lobes. "Should we offer Mr. Matthews an opportunity?" Max replied with a brief, firm yelp that prompted my laughter. "I'd be delighted," I answered, sensing something akin to flutters in my abdomen. For the initial time in ages, Max and I will be anticipating. Gazing at my loyal friend, now securely returned to his proper place, I pondered the odd route's existence occasionally follows. My kids had committed a grave error, but maybe, just possibly, it would prove to be a pivotal moment for everyone. And who knows? Perhaps the gentleman who aided in delivering my kids such an essential teaching could introduce a fresh aspect to my recently liberated existence. After all, any gentleman who grasped the worth of a shelter animal, registered or not, already earned favor. Max exhaled satisfiedly, shutting his lids as he placed his skull on my thigh. The next day would present fresh obstacles, but presently, everything was correct in our realm once more. I awoke the subsequent day to Max's cozy mass pressed to my flank. His steady respiration, a soothing assurance that he was indeed home. For an instant, I merely reclined there, soaking in the fact that I'd recovered not only my pet, but something more vital, my dignity. The dwelling was hushed. Stephen usually slumbered till midday, and Brenda was probably evading me, still digesting the jolt from the prior day's encounter. I rose from the mattress, Max instantly vigilant and trailing as I directed toward the cooking space. "Good day," Brenda's voice startled me. She was seated at the counter, fully attired and holding a mug of brew. Shadows beneath her eyes implied minimal rest. "You're awake early," I noted, proceeding to the brew machine. "Couldn't rest," she confessed. "Mother, we must discuss yesterday's events." I filled my mug and positioned myself opposite her. Max settled amid us, his skull on my foot, as if fearful I'd vanish again. "I'm attentive." Brenda gazed into her cup for a prolonged period. "I apologize," she ultimately uttered, her tone small. "What we did was inexcusable." Indeed, it was, I concurred, not hastening to alleviate her unease. "Are you truly evicting us?" she inquired, lifting her gaze to mine. "After all you've provided for us?" "I'm not evicting you," I amended. "I'm creating limits that ought to have existed years back." "You're 29, Brenda. Stephen is 32. Residing with your parents should be a short-term crisis solution, not a way of life." "But we're kin," she objected faintly. "Yes, we are, and that's precisely why this must alter." I bent forward, maintaining her stare. "I've facilitated you both excessively long. Following your father's exit, I was terrified of disappointing you, so I compensated overly. I've served as your buffer, your financier, and your housekeeper for years. It stops now." Tears brimmed her eyes. "I don't know if I can succeed independently. I've never attempted." I completed for her. "That's the issue, Brenda. You're more intelligent and capable than you realize. But while I keep rescuing you from every slip, you'll never uncover your true potential." She dabbed at her eyes, smearing eyeliner on her cheeks. "What about Stephen?" "He's in worse shape than me." "Stephen will adapt too," I declared resolutely. "He holds a qualification in computing that he's never utilized correctly because it's always been simpler to obtain funds from me than chase a demanding vocation." The noise of dragging steps signaled my son's entry. He halted at the threshold, eyes narrowing distrustfully at our grave demeanors. What's occurring? Mother was merely restating that we're relocating. Brenda notified him, a fresh acceptance in her tone. That national operative business was merely a ruse, Stephen protested, directing to the brew container. You can't genuinely force us to depart over an error. I sensed Max stiffen against my foot, detecting my mood shift. An error? I echoed, my tone perilously soft. You pilfered and traded my pet, Stephen. You fabricated tales about Max's origins to secure more funds. You violated my faith in the most basic manner. We were in dire need, he cried, flinging his arms. I owed some people cash. They were menacing till I refused to listen. I interjected. Regardless of the cause, you opted to address your dilemma by generating a far larger one for me. That's what you've both done for years. Your crises always turn into mine. Your bad decisions always become my load to mend. Stephen struck his cup on the surface. So, you're simply discarding us? Excellent nurturing, Mother. No, Stephen, I answered calmly. Excellent nurturing would have involved establishing these limits ages ago. I disappointed you both by simplifying everything, by never permitting you to confront the innate results of your deeds. And now you're compensating for delayed time. He scoffed mockingly. Now I'm rectifying my error. I assented. 30 days. That's lenient given your actions. You'll locate new residences, new employment if required, and new methods to handle your finances that exclude me as a buffer. And if we fail, he defied. You will, I stated with greater assurance than I experienced. Because you must. That's how maturity functions for most folks. The cooking space grew silent, save for the gentle thud of Max's tail on the floor. At last, Brenda rose. I'm contacting Jessica, she declared. Her housemate departed last month. Perhaps she's still seeking someone to share costs. The astonishment on Stephen's visage at his siblings' surrender would have been amusing in other situations. You're truly complying with this? He questioned disbelievingly. Brenda dismissed with a shrug. What alternative do we possess? We messed up, Stephen. Severely. And truthfully, perhaps Mother's correct. Perhaps it's time we learn to support ourselves. As she exited the cooking space, Stephen scowled at me, his demeanor a blend of disloyalty and dread. This isn't just. Neither was trading Max, I answered plainly. Behaviors have results, Stephen. It's time you grasped that. Following his furious departure, I completed my brew in the abrupt stillness of the cooking space. Max's skull now on my thigh as I idly rubbed his lobes. The clash had proceeded better than anticipated with Brenda. Purr with Stephen, but the limit was established. Now I merely needed to uphold it. My device sounded with a message verifying supper that night. The Waterside Eatery at 7. They offer a fine deck where Max is permitted. Paul, I beamed despite the morning's emotional strain. Will attend. Eager for it, Jane. I devoted the remainder of the day to lavishing Max with additional care, compensating for our parting with extended strolls and his beloved snacks. The animal seemed intent on not letting me escape his view, shadowing so near that I almost stumbled over him multiple times. At 6:30, I stood facing my wardrobe, abruptly immobilized by uncertainty. What attire suits a meal with a man who assisted in staging a phony national probe to educate your mature offspring? It had been ages since I'd participated in a genuine romantic outing that I felt adolescent once more. Brimming with anxious expectation, I ultimately chose a basic azure gown I hadn't donned in years. Astonished to discover it fit flawlessly still. Informal yet refined, suitable for an al fresco dining spot without seeming overly eager. What do you believe? I questioned Max, who observed my preparation with his skull angled curiously. Too excessive? He emitted a gentle bark that I decided to view as endorsement. As I added lip color, another long-abandoned practice, I glimpsed my image in the reflector and halted. The lady gazing back appeared, altered somehow, more assured, more distinct, as if the limit establishment of the past day had honed my outlines, restoring me to clarity after years of permitting myself to fade into a vague supporting role in my own existence. A gentle tap at my sleeping quarters entrance disrupted my reflections. Enter, I summoned, anticipating Stephen with further grievances. Instead, Brenda glanced in, her demeanor hesitant. Wow, Mother, you appear truly attractive. Appreciate it, I answered, startled by the praise. She entered the chamber, fiddling with her garment's cuff. You're meeting him, aren't you? The authority figure. Paul, I amended. And yes, we're dining. Is it romantic? I weighed the query. I believe so. That's positive, she uttered gently. You haven't pursued anyone since father departed. It's overdue. I pivoted to confront her completely, attempting to decipher the feelings behind her statements. Brenda, are you fine with this? With all that's transpiring, she exhaled, dropping onto the mattress edge. I'm not precisely fine, but I think I comprehend. And perhaps it's what we all require. It is, I guaranteed her, extending to clasp her palm. You and Stephen possess immense capability. You simply must cease concealing from it. I phoned Jessica. She stated, I'm viewing this space tomorrow. It's compact, but I can manage it if I add more shifts at the shop. Pride surged in my core. That's an excellent beginning. What about Stephen? She inquired, concern furrowing her forehead. He's not managing this well. Stephen will adapt, I uttered, wishing I appeared more convinced than I was. He must, and so must I. We've all been trapped in this detrimental cycle too long. Brenda assented, then rose and astonished me with a swift embrace. Enjoy tonight and inform Max not to stay awake, she appended with a tiny grin. Following her exit, I examined my look one last time, seized Max's restraint, and directed to the exit. Stephen was absent, but I could detect subdued phone discussions from his chamber. Whether he was hunting for living arrangements or grumbling to companions about his irrational parents stayed unclear. As Max and I traveled to the dining spot, I experienced an odd mix of remorse, resolve, and something resembling thrill. For the initial time and more than I recalled, I was prioritizing myself, not merely in attending this romantic meeting, but in reclaiming my dwelling, my limits, and my existence. Max occupied the front seat, his skull periodically swiveling to verify I remained present. I extended to rub behind his lobes. It's a fresh phase for everyone, boy, I informed him. Let's observe where it guides. I reached the waterside eatery exactly at 7. A timeliness routine embedded from decades of medical shifts. Max positioned obediently beside me as we lingered by the entry, his tail brushing the surface each time the portal opened in expectation of encountering our meal partner. The dining spot overlooked the stream that split our community, its expansive rock deck scattered with warmth devices to repel the initial spring coolness. Several other customers had included their pets, which comforted me that Max would be accepted. Jane. I turned at the call of my name and discovered Paul Matthews nearing from the vehicle area. Sans his strict national operative character, he appeared distinct, more accessible in deep denim and a marine coat, though equally refined. You appear charming, he uttered, his gaze creasing at the edges when he beamed. The compliment sounded unfamiliar to my ears after numerous years of being overlooked. Grateful, I answered, abruptly conscious of how extended it had been since I'd engaged in a genuine romantic outing. Max and I were merely appreciating the scenery. At the mention of his name, Max perked, tail swinging madly as he identified his short-term guardian. To my astonishment, he welcomed Paul with nearly equivalent zeal as he'd displayed to me. He appears to have pardoned me for my role in your minor family turmoil. Paul laughed, crouching to rub behind Max's lobes. Precisely the correct location, I observed. You two connected during his short visit. We did, Paul verified, rising. He's a remarkable animal. You've instructed him splendidly. The attendant led us to a side table on the deck with a dominant view of the stream. Max relaxed happily beneath the table, his skull on my foot in what had turned his fresh routine since coming back. I must confess, Paul uttered once we were placed. Yesterday's display was one of the more peculiar applications of my career history. And what precisely is that history? I questioned, realizing I knew virtually nothing about this gentleman beyond his dramatic National Operative Act. 22 years with the FBI, he answered, observing my reaction attentively. I retired last year and now advise for a private protection company that handles assistance animals. So, while I've never truly detained anyone for dog-associated deceit, I wasn't completely performing yesterday. I almost choked on my liquid. You truly were a national operative? Special operative, counter-espionage unit, he confirmed with a faint grin. Those partners of mine weren't operatives, though, just colleagues from the protection company who relished their parts a tad too much. So you could have genuinely detained my kids, I uttered gradually, absorbing this fresh data. Paul's demeanor grew more solemn. Technically, what they did might count as deceit, but it would have been a small matter that probably wouldn't lead to accusations. The chance of 5 years in confinement was an exaggeration for teaching aims. Thank goodness, I whispered, though a portion of me believed Stephen and Brenda merited the terror they'd felt. I'm still processing you being a real FBI operative. Former operative, he amended. Though ingrained habits persist, as you witnessed yesterday, once you've devoted 2 decades to analyzing individuals, constructing cases, and performing interrogations, you incline to handle every circumstance a particular way, including supper with a lady you scarcely know. His gaze met mine, warm with humor, particularly then. Professional risk, I'm afraid. I've likely already observed 15 things about you that most folks would overlook, such as I dared, curiously fascinated rather than disturbed. You're dominant with your left hand, but employ your right for some activities, he noted. You've labored in healthcare, nursing particularly, shown by how you surveyed the dining spot for cleanliness concerns when we sat, and the mild toughening on your palms from regular cleansing. You've been separated for, I'd estimate, about 10 years, and you haven't engaged in a romantic outing in quite a while. I stared at him, balance between amazed and disconcerted. That's astonishingly precise, though. It's been 12 years since the separation. I was near, he dismissed with a shrug. Your opportunity. Your opportunity for what? To share what you've noticed about me. Everyone detects things. Most simply don't deliberately analyze them. I examined him attentively, accepting the dare. You've been separated too. No marriage band, but the pale mark is still vaguely apparent. You possess a pet of your own based on the fur traces on your pants that don't match Max's shade. You're structured to the level of being mildly compulsive, based on how you reorganized the utensils and seasonings as soon as we sat. And I paused, then resolved to gamble. You're isolated. His brows lifted a bit. What prompts that? The manner you engaged with Max. Not merely amicable, but truly linked. Most folks pat animals. You interacted with him. And the reality that you undertook all that effort yesterday. The phony probe, the drama of it all, indicates you don't object to exerting yourself to assist an unknown person with a family issue. Individuals who are completely content with their own existences seldom involve themselves that deeply in others' conflicts. For an instant, I feared I'd exceeded bounds, but then he chuckled. A sincere, open sound. Well played, Jane. Perhaps you overlooked your vocation as a detective. Our discussion proceeded smoothly afterward, through the meal and suite, addressing our professions, our post-separation lives, and ultimately returning to the incidents that had united us. I must inquire, I uttered as we lingered over brew, why did you consent to return Max to me without resistance? You'd invested a substantial amount in him. Paul's demeanor softened as he looked down at Max, who had stayed an ideal gentleman during the repast. Multiple reasons. First, it was evident from your call that you truly adored him while your kids were merely utilizing him as a handy cash source. Second, the protection company really employs Malinois for specific tasks, and Max, marvelous as he is, wasn't fitting for that role. And third, I urged, detecting there was additional. A mild grin tugged at his lips. Third, I was fascinated by a lady who, rather than shouting or menacing when her kids traded her pet, calmly contacted the purchaser and suggested a logical resolution that demonstrated a degree of poise I've seldom seen. Believe me, I did my shouting after we ended the call. I confessed into a cushion so they wouldn't detect. Still, you managed your response when it counted. He bent forward a little. That's uncommon, Jane. Most individuals permit feelings to control their behaviors, especially in turmoil. Years of urgent care nursing, I clarified. You master compartmentalizing or you don't endure the position. As the night concluded, Paul demanded to escort Max and me to my vehicle. The evening had turned cool, and I shivered a bit in my thin gown. "Here," he uttered, removing his coat and placing it over my shoulders before I could object. The action was so traditional, so polite that it temporarily rendered me mute. Grateful, I handled eventually, breathing in the faint aroma of his scent from the material for the coat and for the meal and for yesterday. "My delight," he answered, his tone deeper in the gloom, "though I hope our upcoming engagements won't demand intricate trap setups." "Upcoming engagements," I repeated, my core performing a silly little skip. "I'd greatly desire to encounter you again, Jane," he uttered plainly, without a national probe as excuse. Without Max's mediation, though he's welcome to accompany us. We'd arrived at my vehicle, and I pivoted to confront him, still enveloped in his coat. Max sat patiently next to us, glancing from one person to the other, as if observing a sports match. "I desire that too," I confessed. For a moment, we remained in relaxed quiet. The evening atmosphere filled with the stream sound and far-off dining conversations. Then, Paul bent forward gradually, providing ample time to retreat if I wished. I didn't. His kiss was tender, exploratory rather than insistent. When we parted, I was thankful for the faint vehicle area illumination that concealed the flush I could sense heating my cheeks. "I should head home," I uttered reluctantly. "I suspect tomorrow will involve another session of talks with Stephen." "Naturally," Paul assented. "May I contact you tomorrow?" "I'd be let down if you didn't," I answered, astonished by my own audacity. As Max and I traveled home, I discovered myself beaming at nothing specific. 12 years post-separation, and I'd finally experienced a romantic outing that didn't seem like a duty or a failure. A romantic outing that concluded with a kiss that made me sense like more than merely a parent, a caregiver, a dutiful grown-up. The dwelling was shadowy upon arrival, though a dim azure glow from under Stephen's entrance implied he was still alert, probably gaming or viewing clips. Max scampered through the known spaces, conducting his evening inspection before relaxing on his resting place in my chamber with a satisfied exhale. I draped Paul's coat meticulously on my wardrobe entrance, noting mentally to return it during our next meeting. The idea of seeing him again triggered another small flutter in my core, a feeling so long overlooked that it required a moment to identify it as pure joy. As I readied for rest, though, I checked my device to discover a message from Paul. "Grateful for a marvelous night. Max was the ideal escort. Eager to see you soon." I responded, the delight was mine. Max offers his endorsement, which is significant acclaim. His answer arrived promptly. "I'm flattered. Rest well, Jane." 3 basic words, yet they warmed me as I entered the covers. Max leaped up to position beside me, a treat I seldom permitted, but sensed he'd merited after his trial. "What do you think, boy?" I murmured, rubbing his preferred spot. "Are we truly pursuing this romance at my age?" Max's sole reply was to nestle closer to my flank, his consistent respiration ultimately soothing me toward slumber. Whatever the next day delivered with my kids, at least the present had provided me something unforeseen. A prompt that my existence still contained options beyond serving as a buffer for Stephen and Brenda. For the initial time and more than I recalled, I drifted off contemplating my own tomorrow, not solely theirs. The subsequent morning delivered actuality back with Stephen's tone, loud and irritated, originating from the cooking space. I attired swiftly, pondering what fresh emergency had surfaced. During the night, Max trailed at my heels as I descended to discover Stephen striding, device to his ear. "I don't care about the rules," he was stating, his unoccupied hand waving frantically. "I've been a client for 3 years. You can't simply—" He stopped, listening, then swore. "Fine, whatever." He struck the device on the surface and pivoted to find me observing from the threshold. "Issues?" I questioned mildly. "Credit provider halted my account," he grumbled, passing a hand through his messy locks. "Claimed I skipped too many basic payments." "That occurs," I assented, moving by him to initiate the brew. "What will you do?" "What do you suppose?" he retorted, his manner blaming. "I need to obtain some funds to satisfy them until—" "No," I cut in calmly. The lone word lingered between us. Basic and unyielding. Stephen gazed at me as if I'd abruptly begun a foreign tongue. "What do you imply?" "No," he stammered. "Mother, this is grave. They're mentioning collections." I realize it's grave, I answered, quantifying brew grounds with intentional accuracy. But my response remains no. You're 32, Stephen. Resolve it. His countenance reddened with fury. So, this is the new normal. I commit one fault. Trading my pet wasn't one fault. I corrected him, maintaining my tone balance despite the rage igniting in my core. It was the ultimate trigger after years of faults that I've concealed for you. And now you're facing what transpires without a buffer. This concerns that Matthew's fellow, doesn't it? Stephen's tone grew resentful. You experience one romantic outing and suddenly you're transformed. I pivoted to confront him entirely. This is unrelated to Paul. This concerns me finally imposing the limits I should have set years back. Your monetary troubles are precisely that. Yours unbelievable, he grumbled. My own parent. Yes, your parent, I assented. Not your financier, not your aide, not your cleaner. Your parent who cherishes you sufficiently to cease supporting conduct that's damaging you long-term. He departed furiously without further words, stomping upward like the youth he still mimicked in numerous ways. I exhaled, filling my brew and settling at the counter. Max placing his skull on my knee empathetically. My device hummed with a message from Paul. Good day. Hope I'm not messaging too soon. Wondering if you and Max might accompany me for a stroll near the water this afternoon. Despite the clash with Stephen, I discovered myself beaming as I responded, not too soon whatsoever. A stroll sounds ideal. 2 p.m. His answer arrived swiftly. 2 p.m. confirmed. Eager for it. A cough in the threshold, and I raised my gaze to discover Brenda observing me, an expression blending fun and worry on her countenance. You're beaming at your device, she noted, proceeding to fill her brew. Must be the authority gentleman. Paul, I amended instinctively. And yes, we're going for a walk this afternoon. Brenda positioned across from me, examining my countenance with unusual focus. You truly fancy him, don't you? It's merely a walk, Brenda. MHM. She hummed skeptically. That's why you're radiant like a youth with her initial infatuation. I sensed my cheeks heat. Don't be absurd. I'm not criticizing, she guaranteed me, extending to pat Max's skull. It's pleasant to witness you engaged in something beyond employment and, well, us. The confession astonished me. I didn't realize you'd observed. Of course I observed, she answered, appearing slightly insulted. I'm self-centered, mother, not sightless. You've been in automatic mode for years. All about you, your position, your timetable, your whole existence has circled around sustaining Stephen and me. That's what parents do, I uttered, though the rationale rang empty even to me. To a degree, Brenda assented. But there's a distinction between sustaining your offspring and subordinating your complete being to them, particularly when the offspring are supposedly mature. I gazed at her momentarily voiceless. When had my daughter acquired this degree of insight? Anyway, she proceeded, sipping her brew. I'm going to examine Jessica's location today, and I discussed with my supervisor about expanding my shifts at the shop. She mentioned if I can dedicate to a consistent timetable, she might contemplate a deputy supervisor role. Brenda, that's marvelous, I uttered, truly delighted. I didn't know you were keen on store oversight. She dismissed with a shrug, but I detected the spark of satisfaction in her gaze. It's not what I envisioned with my promotion qualification, but it's a commencement, and I genuinely like it when I'm not viewing it as just a means to support my social activities. Have you informed your sibling about these intentions? Her demeanor darkened. I attempted, but he's in complete sufferer state. Says we should unite against your irrational requests. She formed quotation marks around the final two terms. I think he anticipated me to participate in his uprising. And you're not going to? No, she uttered plainly. This is overdue, Mother. For everyone, including Stephen, even if he can't perceive it yet. I extended across the counter and clasped her palm, unforeseen feeling constricting my throat. When did you become so insightful? I've always been insightful, she answered with a burst of her former assurance. I just opted to disregard my insight when it was easier to let you handle all my troubles. After she departed to prepare for her dwelling inspection, I remained completing my brew. Max still leaning on my limb as if afraid I'd vanish again. The talk with Brenda had left me feeling optimistic and unsure, pleased by her evident growth, yet concerned about Stephen's ongoing opposition. By the moment I left to meet Paul, Stephen still hadn't emerged from his chamber, though I could detect him on the device again, his manner switching between charm and desperation as he presumably navigated his roster of acquaintances who might rescue him. I left a message informing him I'd return later, though I doubted he'd concern himself with my destination or companion. The waterside green space was packed with weekend guests savoring the spring light. I noticed Paul right away positioned near the water's boundary, palms in pockets as he stared over the water. He pivoted as Max and I neared, his countenance brightening with a grin that quickened my pulse embarrassingly. "You located me," he uttered, stooping to welcome Max before rising to meet my gaze. "FBI preparation in action," I jested. Target identified roughly 50 yards from the assigned rendezvous, exhibiting noticeable conduct patterns. He chuckled, the noise warm in the midday atmosphere. Evidently, I need to refine my avoidance methods. We commenced strolling along the water path, Max trotting cheerfully amid us, occasionally halting to explore intriguing aromas or accept admiring strokes from passing youngsters. The discussion flowed readily, covering everything from volumes we'd lately perused to youth recollections of kin outings. "How are matters at the residence?" Paul inquired after some time. "Any repercussions from our minor endeavor?" I exhaled, updating him on Brenda's seeming change and Stephen's persistent opposition. "I'm concerned for him," I confessed. "He's never had to genuinely support himself before. I'm uncertain he knows how." "He'll learn," Paul guaranteed me. "Sometimes the sole way to float is to discover yourself in profound waters." "I just hope he doesn't sink first," I whispered. Paul halted, pivoting to confront me entirely. "You're doing the correct thing, Jane, for everyone. It's not simple, but it's essential." "I know," I uttered, surprising myself with the certainty in my tone. "It's just they've been my entire universe for so long, especially post-separation. I invested everything into being present for them, into ensuring they never experience the desertion their father caused. And in the process, you deserted yourself," Paul noted softly. The words struck with unforeseen power, exposing a reality I'd never completely recognized. I had deserted myself, my requirements, my wishes, my identity apart from parenthood. "Yes," I murmured, throat tight. "I suppose I did." Paul extended, grasping my palm in his. "Maybe it's time to rediscover yourself." Max selected that instant to yelp excitedly at a passing rodent, charging ahead and nearly unbalancing me. Paul stabilized me, his palm warm on my back, and we both chuckled at the animal's focused pursuit of the fleeing creature. "Apologies for that," I expressed regret as Max settled. "He has firm views on rodents, an animal of refined preferences," Paul assented gravely, though his gaze sparkled with fun. "Shall we proceed?" "There's a pleasant cafe around the turn that offers superb citrus drink and permits pets on their terrace." As we advanced, his palm located mine again, our digits linking with easy familiarity. I couldn't recall the last occasion I'd clasped hands with someone, and the basic contact felt both unfamiliar and vital, like rediscovering a forgotten delight. At the cafe, we secured a table overlooking the liquid, Max relaxing contentedly at our feet. Paul demanded to cover our beverages despite my objections. "You can handle the next," he uttered, and the informal suggestion that there would be numerous more excursions warmed me more than the spring light. "Share something you've always desired to accomplish, but haven't," he uttered after our citrus drinks arrived. I weighed the query, realizing how infrequently I considered my own wishes anymore. "Journey," I ultimately answered. "I've never ventured abroad. Always intended to visit Italy someday, but then existence intervened. Offspring, vocation, separation. Italy is stunning." Paul assented. "I devoted 6 months in Rome on duty early in my profession. The cuisine alone justifies the voyage." "You've journeyed extensively?" I inquired, truly interested in his existence before knowing him. Nature of the position, he verified, though mostly to locations the typical visitor would evade. But post-retirement, I treated myself to a genuine holiday. No emblem, no weapon, no duties beyond selecting which vintage to pair with supper. "That sounds marvelous," I uttered, attempting to envision an existence where my largest worry was vintage choice. "It was," he assented, "and it could be for you too." Now, Italy remains there, awaiting your exploration. The proposal lingered between us, enticing in its options. What hindered me now? My offspring were grown. I had savings for retirement, and for the initial time in decades, no one relied on me for their everyday survival. Even Max could be housed, or the idea emerged uninvited. Perhaps Paul would tend to him again. Maybe, I uttered, permitting myself to consider the option. Once all stabilizes with Stephen and Brenda, Paul's gaze held mine. Don't delay excessively, Jane. Existence tends to occupy whatever room we allocate. If you don't create space for your aspirations, other demands will gladly fill that area. As Max and I traveled home later, his words resonated in my thoughts. How many occasions had I postponed my own wishes, always delaying them until some undefined future when everyone else's requirements were fulfilled, a future that never arrived. The dwelling was quiet upon return. A message from Brenda on the surface notifying me she'd return late. She was dining with Jessica to talk about the dwelling. No indication of Stephen, though his vehicle remained in the path. I nourished Max, then prepared myself a basic meal, savoring the uncommon tranquility of an unoccupied residence. As I consumed, I activated my computer and discovered myself searching Italy journey bundles. Just browsing, I assured myself, just contemplating possibilities. By the time I retired, I'd saved 3 potential routes and sought details from a journey service focusing on independent excursions for ladies over 50. Not a pledge, I reminded myself. Just exploring choices. Max ascended to accompany me, circling thrice before positioning against my flank with a satisfied exhale. I petted his gentle coat, pondering Paul's statements about forsaken selves and rediscovered aspirations. Things are shifting, boy, I murmured. For everyone. I awoke to the noise of breaking glass, trailed by oaths. Immediately vigilant, I glanced at the timer, 3:17 a.m., and rose from the mattress. Max was already at the entrance, for raised, a deep rumble in his chest. "Shoo," I whispered, laying a soothing palm on his skull. "Let me inspect." The corridor was shadowy, but illumination spilled from the cooking space below. I crept downward, Max trailing despite my gesture to remain. At the base, I halted, listening. Stupid, useless. Stephen's tone slurred and furious. Another smash ensued. I turned the corner to discover my son teetering in the cooking space center, encircled by shattered shards and spilled alcohol. An empty container lay tilted near his feet, and he was struggling with another from the storage where I kept a few drinks for special events. "Stephen," I uttered warily. He whirled, almost toppling. His gaze was red, his attire rumpled. "Well, see who's here," he sneered. "Parent of the year. You're intoxicated." I declared the evident, assessing the ruin and creating disorder. "What do you concern?" he growled, gesturing wildly with the container still gripped in his palm. "You've clarified where merely loads to you." Max pressed to my leg, detecting the strain. His presence steadied me as I drew a deep breath, resolved not to heighten the scenario. "Set the container down, Stephen," I uttered calmly. "Let's tidy this, and we can discuss tomorrow when you're clear-headed." "Always so logical," he ridiculed, swigging straight from the container. Flawless Jane Parker never panics, just calmly ruins her offspring's existences. "That's sufficient," I uttered. "My tolerance is waning." "You're 32, not 17. This conduct is intolerable." "Tolerable," he echoed derisively. "Now what's intolerable?" "My own parent preferring some unknown fellow over her offspring. Evicting us because her fresh partner dislikes us restricting her freedom." "This is unrelated to Paul," I answered, keeping my tone balanced despite the fury building in my core. "This concerns you and Brenda learning to support yourselves. And if you're so worried about housing, wrecking my cooking space at 3 in the morning isn't your wisest plan." He laughed, a rough, resentful noise. "Your cooking space, your dwelling, your pet, everything belongs to you, doesn't it? Heaven forbid we contact any of your valued items. Stephen, you're intoxicated and distressed. Let's discuss tomorrow." "No," he yelled, striking the container on the surface so forcefully I worried it might shatter too. "We're discussing now. You want to know my day? I devoted 8 hours contacting everyone I know, pleading for funds or a spot to stay. Know what I discovered? Nobody desires a 32-year-old failure who resides with his mommy. The raw agony beneath his fury was tangible, but I fortified myself against the familiar impulse to save him. I'm sorry it was tough, I uttered quietly. But confronting these facts is part of maturing, something you've evaded too long. Maturing, he sneered. Is that what you're doing with your FBI partner? Experiencing a middle-age crisis. I felt my poise slipping. My connection with Paul is none of your concern, and I suggest you halt now before uttering something regrettable. Or what? He challenged, his demeanor ugly with liquor and bitterness. You'll evict me earlier. Notify me to your phony national operative friends, or you'll harm our bond beyond fix, I answered truthfully. I'll perpetually cherish you, Stephen, but I'm rapidly losing admiration for you, and once that's lost, it's very difficult to regain. Something in my manner must have pierced his drunken fog. He blinked, briefly quiet, then reached for the container again. Leave it, I uttered sharply. You've consumed enough. Don't instruct me, he grumbled, but his rebellion seemed lackluster now. Then behave like a grown-up I don't need to direct, I countered. Tidy this disorder, retire, and tomorrow, begin organizing your existence instead of faulting me for your troubles. I turned to depart, gesturing for Max to follow. He's not returning, you know. Stephen called after me, his tone abruptly small. Father didn't, and this Paul fellow won't either. They never do. I halted, my core aching despite my fury. This then was the true injury. Not just my removal of monetary aid, but the dread of another desertion. Stephen had been 15 when his father departed, mature enough to comprehend betrayal, but not its reasons. Paul isn't your father, I uttered without pivoting. And I'm not the same lady your father deserted. Whatever occurs between Paul and me is unrelated to you and Brenda. But you need to grasp something, Stephen. Even if he departed tomorrow, nothing alters. This fresh limit is lasting. I proceeded upward without awaiting his reply, though I detected what sounded like a stifled cry behind me. Every parental urge prompted me to return, to soothe my pained child. But the logical portion of me knew that soothing now would merely strengthen the cycle we were attempting to shatter. In my sleeping quarters, I positioned on the mattress edge, trembling slightly from the encounter. Max pressed his warm form against my legs, providing silent comfort. I'm doing the correct thing, I whispered, as much to persuade myself as anything. He requires this, even if he resents me for it. From below came the sound of hesitant motions, then the cautious clatter of shards being gathered. At least he was tidying his disorder, a minor advance, but perhaps the start of embracing accountability. I lay down, though I knew rest would be elusive now. My device glowed with a message alert I hadn't noticed earlier. Thinking of you. I had a marvelous time today. Sweet dreams, Jane. Paul's basic message brought an involuntary grin to my lips despite the night's turmoil. I responded, knowing he wouldn't view it until day. Tonight was tough with Stephen, but I'm holding steady. Your backing means more than you realize. Thank you for a lovely day. As I placed the device aside, I realized something had changed within me. 6 months back, even 6 weeks back, I would have hurried to smooth matters with Stephen, to shield him from his actions' results, to restore kin harmony at any expense. Now, despite the ache it caused us both, I was maintaining the boundary. It wasn't about penalty. It wasn't even about instructing him a lesson. It was about finally recognizing that the greatest wrong I could do my kids was to prevent them from facing the natural outcomes of their choices, both positive and negative. Max positioned beside me with a soft puff, his solid presence comforting. Whatever the morning delivered, whatever challenges awaited with Stephen and Brenda, I wasn't confronting them solo anymore. I had my loyal pet, a fresh connection brimming with potential, and most crucially, an increasing sense of my own value beyond parenthood. For now, that would suffice. Morning delivered a quiet, strained dwelling. I discovered the cooking space immaculate, proof that Stephen had ultimately tidied his disorder, but no trace of my son. His sleeping quarters entrance stayed firmly closed when I passed, no noises emerging to show if he was alert or still recovering from his night of indulgence. Max trailed me downward, his claws tapping on the wood as I prepared brew and contemplated the day forward. I had the evening duty at the medical center tomorrow, my ultimate week before retirement formally started. The idea brought a mix of ease and unease. 30 years of organized purpose ending, leaving me to define my own focuses for the first time since higher education. Brenda emerged around 10, appearing unusually upbeat despite the hour. "Day," she greeted, directing straight to the brew container. "You appear fatigued." "All fine. Your sibling had a difficult night," I responded tactfully. "How was supper with Jessica?" "Terrific." She perched on a seat at the surface, clutching her cup. "I'm claiming the space. It's tiny, but the cost is fair, and it's near the shop. I can relocate next weekend." "That's splendid, Brenda," I uttered, truly delighted by her drive. "I'm proud of you," she beamed, the basic commendation evidently significant to her. "Thanks. I know this hasn't been simple for any of us, but I think it's going to be beneficial for all of us." "I hope so," I assented, though thoughts of Stephen's intoxicated fury gave me pause. "Have you heard from your authority man today?" she inquired, shifting the topic with a playful spark in her gaze. "His name is Paul, and yes, we messaged this morning," I confessed, feeling oddly timid, discussing my romantic life with my daughter. "He's invited me to supper at his location tomorrow evening." "Ooh, homemade repast." Brenda raised her brows suggestively. "Matters are advancing seriously." I rolled my eyes, though I couldn't suppress a grin. "It's just supper, Brenda." "If you insist," she sang, evidently doubtful. "What are you donning?" "I haven't considered it yet," I confessed. "Well, you should," she proclaimed abruptly. "All business." Initial time at his location is a declaration chance. Not too relaxed, but not excessively formal either. You want to appear effortless but purposeful. Despite myself, I chuckled. "When did you turn into a romance specialist?" "I may be awful at cash handling and life choices, but style and romance tactics." She tossed her hair theatrically. "That's my strength." The instant of lightness was disrupted by Stephen's entry. He positioned in the threshold, pale and unkempt, eyes red and swollen. The casual viewer might blame his look on recovery alone, but I identified the signs of weeping too. "Day," he mumbled, not meeting gazes as he shuffled toward the brew. Brenda gave me a questioning glance, but I shook my head slightly, silently requesting her not to probe for details about last night's clash. "I was just informing Mother I secured a spot," she uttered instead, her manner intentionally positive. "Jessica's housemate left, so I'm taking the space." Stephen grunted indifferently, concentrating deeply on enhancing his brew with sweetener and dairy. "Have you advanced with your housing hunt?" I questioned cautiously. He shrugged, still evading eye contact. "Possibly, examining a few choices." The falsehood was obvious, but I opted not to contest it. Last night's outburst had somewhat cleared the atmosphere, revealing the raw hurt under his fury. Pressing now would only push him back behind his protective barriers. "Let me know if you require assistance with relocation details," I offered to both of you. Stephen finally raised his gaze, surprise briefly supplanting the caution in his expression. "You'd still aid with that?" "Certainly," I answered simply. Imposing limits doesn't mean I've ceased caring, Stephen. It just means I'm altering how I express it. He processed this momentarily, then nodded faintly before withdrawing with his brew. The exchange apparently depleting his limited social energy for the morning. After he departed, Brenda exhaled softly. "What occurred last night?" I sighed, providing her a shortened account of Stephen's intoxicated clash, while omitting some of his harsher blames. "He'll adapt," she uttered when I concluded, though she sounded less sure than before. "He just needs time to absorb." "This is tougher for him than for me." "Why do you believe that?" I questioned, truly curious about her view. She weighed the query seriously. "Stephen was always Father's preferred. When Father left, it affected him differently, like dual rejection. I think he shifted all that need for approval to you, and now he senses you're deserting him too." She shrugged. "Plus, he's male. They have more pride invested in the whole self-reliance matter." The perception surprised me again. I found myself wondering when my fashion-focused daughter had developed such feeling awareness. "That's remarkably observant, Brenda." "I'm not just a lovely face, Mother," she answered with a wink, rising from the seat. Now about tomorrow's attire for your romantic outing. The remainder of the day passed without incident. Stephen stayed in his chamber, emerging only for hygiene breaks and to search for nourishment. I took Max for an extended stroll, the spring atmosphere filled with the aroma of fresh blooms and trimmed lawn. Paul messaged multiple times, informal, warm notes that made me grin like a schoolgirl with her first infatuation. By evening, I found myself before my wardrobe evaluating options for tomorrow's supper at Paul's dwelling, with Brenda providing commentary from her spot on my mattress. Not that one, she opposed when I displayed a practical marine gown. Too corporate meeting. You want something gentler, more womanly? I am 55, Brenda, I reminded her dryly. Not 25. Age is irrelevant, she declared with youthful assurance. What counts is how the attire makes you feel. She searched through my wardrobe, shifting hangers with growing dismay. Mother, when was the last time you acquired something just because it made you feel attractive? I tried to recall. Before the separation. Perhaps for a work event 5 years back. The query revealed yet another way I'd neglected my own needs and desires over the years. I can't recall, I confessed. Brenda's expression softened. That decides it. We're shopping tomorrow. You need something unique for this romantic outing. I have a duty tomorrow, I reminded her. You're free at 3, right? The shopping center's open until 9. Ample time. Her tone allowed no dispute. Consider it my gratitude for not ejecting us immediately. Despite my objections about needless costs, part of me was moved by her zeal and by the prospect of time together that didn't involve emergency handling or monetary aid. All right, I yielded, but nothing too exposing or costly. Trust me, she grinned. I'm going to select something that makes FBI man's eyes bulge. His name is Paul, I amended for what felt like the 100th time, though I couldn't help grinning at her depiction. After she departed, I sat abruptly overwhelmed by the oddity of it all. A week prior, my existence had followed the same routines it had for years. Employment, residence, facilitating my mature offspring, occasional excursions with Max, repeat. Now everything was changing. My bond with Stephen and Brenda, my approaching retirement, my unforeseen link with Paul. Max ascended beside me, resting his skull on my knee as if sensing my turbulent thoughts. What do you think, boy? I questioned softly. Is it feasible to rewrite your existence at 55? He gazed up at me with total confidence in his expressive eyes, and I chose to interpret his gentle bark as yes. Perhaps this was the positive side to my kid's betrayal in trading Max, not just his safe return, but the series of changes it had sparked. Without that trigger, I might have persisted in my comfortable groove indefinitely, observing existence pass while I focused solely on others' needs. Now, for the first time in decades, I was contemplating my own wishes, my own future. And, surprisingly, despite the strain with Stephen and the uncertainty ahead, I felt more vital than I had in years. The shopping trip with Brenda proved unexpectedly enjoyable. After my final duty at the medical center, a bittersweet half-day of farewells and good wishes from colleagues I'd labored with for decades, I met my daughter at the shopping center, feeling oddly anxious about the whole venture. Relax, mother, Brenda uttered, linking her arm with mine as we navigated the busy halls. This is meant to be enjoyable, not a dental procedure. I haven't shopped for romantic attire in 15 years, I reminded her. I'm not even certain what's suitable anymore. That's why you have me, she answered confidently, guiding me toward a store I'd passed countless times but never entered. Trust the specialist. For the next 2 hours, I tried more ensembles than in the prior 5 years combined. Brenda was a surprisingly considerate advisor, choosing items that complemented my shape without pushing me too far from my ease. She rejected anything dowdy. You're romantic, not attending a religious gathering, mother, while also dismissing pieces I found too bold. We want refined with a touch of allure, not frantic homemaker. Eventually, we selected a gentle overlapping gown in a rich turquoise that Brenda insisted highlighted my eyes, matched with elevated footwear that added stature without sacrificing ease. The ensemble was undeniably more fashionable than my usual functional clothing. Yet, it still felt like me, just a marginally more refined version. What do you think? Brenda questioned as I inspected my image. I adore it, I confessed, surprised by how sincerely I meant it. The lady in the reflector appeared confident, appealing, and yes, even a bit alluring. All things I hadn't linked with myself in far too long. Paul won't know what struck him, she declared contentedly. As we exited the store with our acquisitions, Brenda proposed stopping for brew, sitting opposite her in the cafe, observing her talk animatedly about her new position duties and dwelling plans. I felt a shift in our bond. Less parent-child, more like companions. Equal grown-ups sharing their existences rather than one constantly saving the other. I don't think I've properly expressed gratitude, I uttered during a pause in talk. Brenda appeared confused. For the gown? You covered it for adapting so elegantly to these shifts. I explained for comprehending why they're needed instead of battling me like your sibling. She mixed her drink thoughtfully. I was furious initially, she confessed. When you said we must relocate, my first reaction was pure outrage. How dare you after years of sustaining us? But then I began considering what my existence would resemble in 5 years if nothing altered. And I prompted when she halted. And it was gloomy, she uttered frankly. Still in my youth chamber, working a position I view as temporary, even though I've been there 3 years, watching my companions build vocations and bonds while I'm trapped in eternal youth. She shrugged. Once I viewed it that way, I realized you're granting us a favor, not penalizing us. I extended across the table and clasped her palm. I'm so proud of you, Brenda. I know this isn't simple. It's not, she assented. But neither is observing your parents suspend her whole existence while you squander your capability. That's a different kind of load. Her words struck me with unexpected force. I'd always seen my concessions as necessary, even honorable, the core of good parenting. It had never occurred to me that my kids might feel culpability or accountability for how completely I'd submerged my identity into caring for them. Well, I uttered, trying to brighten the suddenly emotional instant. You don't need to concern about that anymore. As you can observe, I'm officially re-entering the realm of living. Good, she answered firmly. You merit it, Mother. You've provided us everything. It's your turn now. By the time we reached home, carrying shopping sacks and meal to go for supper, I felt nearer to my daughter than in years. Stephen's vehicle was absent from the path, a minor relief given my anxiety about the night ahead. He's likely at Ryan's, Brenda guessed when I mentioned his absence. They've been gaming partners forever. Ryan has an extra space in his dwelling. That might be Stephen's optimal choice if he can humble himself enough to request. I assented, hoping she was accurate. Despite his opposition, I wanted Stephen to succeed just as Brenda was. The goal wasn't to penalize him, but to propel him into the self-reliant maturity he'd been evading. Later, as I prepared for my romantic outing with perhaps more attention than I'd given my appearance in a decade, I found myself humming, an unconscious sign of happiness that surprised me. Max observed from his spot on the mattress, head angled in curious watch. What do you think? I questioned, turning to show him the full effect of the new gown and the subtle cosmetics Brenda had demanded to apply for me. Max's tail pounded enthusiastically against the bedding. I'll take that as endorsement. I chuckled, bending to tousle his lobes. Now remember, you're staying with Brenda tonight. Be good for her. After one final check in the reflector, I descended where Brenda waited to offer her evaluation. Wow, Mother, she uttered, eyes widening appreciatively. You look stunning. Not excessive? I questioned, abruptly self-aware. Perfect, she guaranteed. Refined, but approachable. The gown was definitely the right selection. The journey to Paul's dwelling gave me time to combat my nerves. It had been so long since I'd been on a proper romantic outing, let alone one at a man's residence. What if I'd misjudged his interest? What if the talk stalled without the cushion of a public venue? Paul resided in a tidy artisan-style house in one of the older districts near the center. As I entered his path, I drew a deep breath, reminding myself that I was a mature lady, not a youth, on her initial romantic outing. He opened the entrance before I could tap, welcoming me with a warm grin that immediately calmed my anxiety. Jane, he uttered, his gaze absorbing my appearance with open appreciation. You look gorgeous. Thank you, I answered, pleased by his reaction. Something aromas wonderful. I promised a homemade meal, he uttered, guiding me inside. I hope you enjoy Italian. The interior of his home mirrored its owner. Tasteful, well-arranged, with subtle elements of warmth that softened the single-man style. Volumes lined the sitting area's walls, mixed with framed images and what seemed to be souvenirs from his journeys. A large German herder rose from his spot by the hearth, approaching to examine me with dignified interest. "This is Rex," Paul presented. "Rex, this is Jane, Max's guardian." I extended my palm for the animal to sniff, smiling when he gave it a soft lick of approval. "Pleased to meet you, Rex." Max conveys his greetings. He's typically more reserved with guests, Paul noted as Rex relaxed contentedly beside me when I sat on the couch. "You must have the knack." "Animals can detect animal lovers," I answered, scratching behind Rex's lobes the way I knew most dogs appreciated. "He's handsome and aware of it." Paul laughed. "Can I offer you a glass of vintage?" Supper's nearly prepared. The night unfolded with the same easy comfort we'd established on our prior outings. Paul was a superb chef, the noodle dish he'd made rivaling anything from eateries. The discussion flowed naturally, covering everything from volumes we'd enjoyed to his FBI profession to my caregiving experiences. "So, tomorrow's formally your initial day of retirement," he remarked as we lingered. "Over sweet cake. How does it feel?" "Unreal," I confessed. 30 years of framework suddenly vanished. "I'm not completely certain what follows." "That's the charm of it," he uttered, refilling our glasses. "You decide. No more timetable dictated by medical duties or your kids' needs. Just pure opportunity." "It's both freeing and frightening," I admitted. "I've identified myself as a caregiver and parent for so long. Without those roles, who am I?" Paul's expression grew reflective. "That's the most thrilling question of all, isn't it? Who is Jane Parker when she's merely herself? Who is Jane Parker when she's merely herself?" Paul's query lingered in the atmosphere between us, profound in its straightforwardness. I sipped vintage, considering how to respond. "I'm not sure I know anymore," I confessed. "I've spent so many years being what everyone else required that I've lost track of my own wishes." Paul reached across the table, his palm covering mine. "Then perhaps that's your first retirement endeavor. Rediscovering Jane." His touch sent a pleasant warmth through me unrelated to the vintage. "Any ideas on where to begin?" "What did you aspire to before life interfered?" he questioned, his gaze holding mine with sincere curiosity. What did young Jane Parker desire before she became a caregiver, a spouse, a parent? The query transported me back decades to a younger self with ambitions I'd almost forgotten. "I wanted to journey," I uttered slowly. "To visit places I'd only read about in volumes. I wanted to learn image capture, not just quick shots, but true creative expression." Paul nodded encouragingly. "What else?" "I wanted to volunteer at a nature recovery center," I continued. Memories emerging like bubbles in calm water. "I've always bonded with creatures, but tending to humans took priority." "Those all sound like aspirations still very achievable," Paul observed. "They do, don't they?" I smiled, feeling a spark of thrill at possibilities I hadn't considered in years. "What about you? Did retired existence match your anticipations?" "Not initially," he confessed. "The agency had been my identity for so long that I felt directionless without it. The protection advising helps, but it took months to adjust to civilian existence. And now I'm learning to value the liberty," he uttered. "The ability to select endeavors that intrigue me, to journey without reporting to a superior, to pursue personal bonds." His gaze met mine with clear intent. The moment hung between us, charged with promise. Then Rex extended and exhaled dramatically at our feet, breaking the strain and making us both chuckle. He has views on the tempo of this bond. Paul laughed, rising to clear our sweet plates. "Come, I want to display something." He guided me through the dwelling to a rear entrance that opened onto a small but perfectly kept garden. Solar lights illuminated a rock trail winding through blooming bushes and carefully positioned plants. At the center stood a wooden seat facing a tiny pool where water flowers floated calmly on the surface. "This is lovely," I breathed, absorbing the serene haven. "My retirement endeavor," Paul explained, leading me to the seat. I knew nothing about horticulture when I began. Destroyed more flora than I'd admit. But there's something healing about creating beauty from bare soil. We sat adjacent, close enough that our shoulders touched. The night atmosphere carried the scent of night blooms and the soft splash of the pool's small cascade. Rex positioned at our feet, apparently satisfied to oversee from a discreet distance. The day we connected, Paul uttered after a comfortable quiet. When you called about Max, I almost ignored it. Unknown contacts usually mean solicitors or someone seeking gratis protection advice. I'm glad you responded, I answered softly. So am I. He pivoted slightly to face me. I've enjoyed learning about you, Jane, more than I anticipated enjoying anything at this phase of my existence. Even though our meeting involved elaborate trickery and phony national operatives, I teased. He chuckled, especially due to that. It showed me your resilience, your dedication to doing what's correct, even when tough. Not many parents would have the bravery to let their offspring face the results of their actions. I'm still not certain I'm doing the right thing, I confessed, especially with Stephen. He's so furious, so opposed. He'll adapt, Paul assured me. Or he won't. Either way, you've provided him the chance to mature at last. That's all any parent can do. His comprehension, the lack of criticism in his tone, moved me profoundly. For years, I'd borne my parental loads alone, making choices without a companion to confirm or challenge my decisions. Having someone who perceived the complexity of my situation without immediately offering simple fixes felt like a gift I hadn't known I needed. Thank you, I uttered simply, for comprehending, for not thinking less of me because my kids are complex. We're all complex, he answered, his palm finding mine in the dim garden light. It's what makes existence engaging. In that instant, with night-flowering plants scenting the atmosphere and Paul's palm warm against mine, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. Not the weary surrender I'd confused for satisfaction, but true calm, the sense that whatever challenges awaited, I wasn't facing them solo anymore. When Paul leaned toward me, his intent clear in his gaze, I met him midway. His kiss was gentle but assured, a perfect equilibrium of respect and longing. Unlike our first kiss in the eatery vehicle area, this one lingered, intensifying as I responded with an zeal that surprised even me. When we finally parted, both slightly out of breath, Paul brushed a lock of hair from my face with tender accuracy. I've been wanting to do that properly since our stroll by the water, he confessed. I've been wanting you to, I admitted, feeling a youthful flush warm my cheeks despite my age. His grin in response made my core flutter in a way I'd thought long past. Would it be too bold to say I'm hoping this is just the start? Not too bold at all, I assured him, leaning in for another kiss that answered his query more eloquently than words could. Rex eventually decided we'd had enough private time, inserting himself between us with a determined push that made us both laugh. Envious? Paul questioned his pet, scratching behind the herder's lobes. He's just reminding us we have ample time, I suggested, though part of me, a part I'd neglected for far too long, wished we could continue where we'd stopped. As if reading my thoughts, Paul squeezed my palm. He's correct, of course. We have time. No need to hurry. The patience in his tone, the implicit vow of future nights together, warmed me more than any rushed passion could have. This wasn't a passing link, but the careful base of something enduring, something worth constructing gradually. When I finally checked my timepiece, I was shocked to find it was nearly midnight. I should depart, I uttered reluctantly. I promised Brenda I wouldn't be too late. Paul escorted me to my vehicle, his arm around my waist in a gesture that felt both guarding and respectful. At the driver's entrance, he kissed me once more, briefly but with enough strength to leave me slightly dazed. I had a wonderful night, he uttered, opening my door. So did I answered, surprised by how insufficient the words seemed to convey the importance of what had transpired between us. As I drove home through the quiet roads, I felt like a different lady than the one who'd left hours earlier. Brenda had been accurate about the gown, but the change went deeper than looks. Something had awakened in me that night. Not just longing, though that was certainly part of it, but a sense of my own value beyond the roles I played for others. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was thrilled about what tomorrow might deliver. Not just the next romantic outing with Paul, but all the tomorrows ahead. Days I could fill with my own choices, my own rediscovered dreams. Arriving home, I found the dwelling dark except for a single light in the sitting area. A note from Brenda on the surface informed me that Max had been a perfect gentleman and was now asleep in my chamber. Stephen's vehicle was in the path, but his room was dark and silent, either already resting or pretending to avoid talk. I moved quietly through the dwelling, not wanting to disturb either of my kids. In my sleeping quarters, Max lifted his skull from my cushion, tail thumping in drowsy welcome. I changed and completed my evening routine, then slipped into bed beside him, my mind still replaying moments from the night. "I think I'm in trouble, boy," I whispered, stroking his soft fur. "The good kind of trouble," he sighed contentedly and settled against me, seemingly unconcerned about human relationship complexities. As always, his uncomplicated affection grounded me, a reminder that love in its purest form was simple. It was humans who complicated it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Stephen's continued opposition, Brenda's upcoming move, the vast open landscape of retirement. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply savor the memory of Paul's kisses, the promise in his eyes, and the glimpse I'd caught of a future brighter than I'd dared imagine. For the first time in years, I fell asleep looking forward to my own life, not just facilitating others. I woke to the sound of activity below, compartments opening and closing, subdued voices, the occasional bump of something heavy being placed. For a moment, I was disoriented. Memories of last night's embraces in Paul's garden mingling with the current reality of morning in my home. Max was already alert, his head tilted toward my bedroom door as he listened to the commotion downstairs. "Let's check it out," I murmured to Max, donning a robe before heading down. The scene in the kitchen halted me. Stephen stood at the counter packing the assorted mugs and glasses he'd collected over the years. Brenda was at the table, organizing a pile of correspondence and documents, neat stacks forming around her. Both looked up at my arrival. "Morning, Mom," Brenda greeted cheerfully. "Sorry if we disturbed you." "What's happening?" I asked, surveying the containers and sacks scattered across the floor. Stephen cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Packing." Aya secured a place. "Ryan's allowing me his extra room until I can get something solo." The declaration, delivered with unusual modesty, left me momentarily speechless. After days of opposition and fury, this abrupt surrender seemed almost dubious. "That's great," I managed finally. "When did you decide this?" He shrugged, focusing intently on wrapping a sci-fi mug in paper. "Last night, I reflected and realized you were correct. It's time." Brenda met my eye, giving a subtle nod suggesting she knew more about the shift than she let on. I noted mentally to question her later. "Well, I'm pleased," I said cautiously, not wanting to disrupt this delicate progress. "Do you need assistance?" "Nah, we've handled it," Stephen replied, still not fully meeting my gaze. "Most of my items are still boxed from when I returned anyway." I poured brew from the pot they'd brewed, watching my kids collaborate with an efficiency that surprised me. Whatever prompted Stephen's change, it apparently included peace with his sister. "How was your romantic outing?" Brenda asked with planned nonchalance, though the spark in her eye indicated real interest. "Lovely," I answered, unable to hide a smile. "Paul's a fine chef," and she prompted, clearly expecting more. "And that's all you need to know," I replied properly, though my flush likely betrayed me. Stephen made a noise between a groan and chuckle. "Please, no specifics. I'm handling enough without considering my parents' romantic life." There was no spite in his tone. If anything, he sounded almost amused, but I approached cautiously nonetheless. "Are you truly fine with this, Stephen? With me seeing Paul?" He paused packing, finally looking directly at me. "It's odd," he confessed. "But I guess it's also odd that I expected you to just exist for us without your own life." He shrugged. "Ryan highlighted that was pretty self-centered of me." "Ryan sounds wise," I observed, storing this friend's name as a positive force. "He's annoying," Stephen muttered, though with clear fondness. "But yeah, he challenged me on much last night. Said I was behaving like a spoiled youth instead of a mature man." "And you listened?" I couldn't conceal my surprise. Stephen's expression grew serious. "When the intoxicated guy you're staying with says you're immature, it's a wake-up." Brenda snorted. And he told Stephen to mature or find elsewhere to rest. Thanks, sis. Stephen shot her an annoyed look before turning to me. Look, Mom. Sorry about the other night. I was drunk and mad and said many things I shouldn't. You're right, it's time for me to stand independently. It's just frightening. The admission, so opposite Stephen's usual bravado, touched me deeply. It is frightening. I agreed. Change always is. But you're capable of far more than you've allowed these past years. He nodded, determination replacing his usual skepticism. Yeah, well, time to discover, I suppose. By midday, both Stephen and Brenda had packed essentials, enough to relocate, though they'd return for remaining items. We loaded Stephen's vehicle first, the three of us cooperating in harmony that felt familiar yet new. As he prepared to depart for Ryan's dwelling, I found myself unexpectedly emotional. Contact me when settled, I said, keeping voice steady. Stephen hesitated, then advanced to embrace me. A genuine hug, not the obligatory one from recent holidays. Thanks, Mom, he said quietly, for not abandoning me, even when I was difficult. I embraced tightly, blinking tears. Never. No matter what, I'm always your parent. He pulled away, uncomfortable with emotion but trying. I know I haven't shown it, but I value everything you've done, and I'll make you proud someday. You already do, I assured. This here, accepting responsibility, facing fears. This makes me proud. After he drove off, Brenda helped carry her containers to my vehicle. We'd planned to move her things to Jessica's dwelling that afternoon, officially emptying my home for the first time in years. What changed with Stephen? I asked as we loaded. Last I saw, he was firmly against relocating. Brenda grinned. I may have contacted Ryan last night during your outing, updated him on the situation, and suggested he might influence more than we could now. Clever, I observed admiringly. Tactical, she corrected. I learned from the best. Besides, Stephen respects Ryan's view, and Ryan's tried getting him to mature for years. As we drove toward Jessica's dwelling, Brenda chattering about decorating plans for her new space, I reflected on the whirlwind changes these past 2 weeks brought. From the shock of learning Max was sold to confrontations with my kids to the unexpected romance with Paul, my life transformed more in 14 days than the prior 14 years. You're quiet, Mom. Brenda observed nearing her new home, second thoughts about the empty home. Not at all, I assured truthfully. Just marveling at how swiftly everything shifted. For the better, though, right? She asked, uncertainty in voice. Absolutely better, I confirmed. For all, I think. After helping Brenda settle into her new area, a cozy space in a well-kept dwelling that she and Jessica were already planning to redo, I returned to a house feeling strangely vacant yet wonderfully calm. Max greeted at the door, body wiggling with joy at my return. Well, boy, I said, kneeling for his enthusiastic welcome. It's just us now. How does that feel? His tail wagged furiously in what I interpreted as approval. I wandered the house, noting how different without my adult kids' constant presence. Not lonely as feared, but open, full of possibility rather than duty. My device chimed with Paul's text. Thinking of you. Dinner tomorrow. Let me take you out properly. I smiled, replying, I'd love that, though your garden was perfect. His response quick. The garden waits whenever ready. So do I. The promise in words sent pleasant shiver. At 55, experiencing butterflies and anticipation thought for youth. Both terrifying and exhilarating to feel alive, attuned to desires. After years of numbness, Max followed to back porch where I sat watching afternoon sunlight through yard trees. On impulse, I searched beginner image classes nearby. Several options, including weekend workshop at community school next month. Without second thoughts, I registered and paid. Then, feeling bold, searched Italy tours for independent travelers. Results overwhelming, but bookmarked promising for later. Small steps reclaiming dreams set aside decades ago. Small steps toward Jane Parker I might have been if life differed. As sunset, casting long shadows, profound peace settled. Path ahead unclear, but first time in years, excited to discover. Not just for kids, but myself. You know, Max, I said quietly. If Stephen and Brenda hadn't sold you, none might have happened. Max tilted head, eyes fixed with devotion. In strange way, I continued, their betrayal gave fresh start. Me, them, even you with weekly playtimes with Rex Paul's planning. Max's tail thumped at new friend mention. Suppose sometimes worst moments lead to best changes, I mused, scratching ears he loved. If you find courage to face them directly instead of hiding from pain, wisdom settled like comfortable blanket. Through 2 weeks upheaval, discovered forgotten strengths, unknown connections, future brighter than imagined. As Max and I watched sunset, silently thanked kids for misguided decision. In solving problems through deceit, inadvertently pushed us to better, authentic lives. Sometimes betrayal begins something beautiful.